Well, Rebecca, I really appreciate you being here with me on the Social Entrepreneurship and Innovation podcast. And for folks who are unfamiliar, would you mind introducing yourself and sharing with us a little bit as to what it is that you do?
Absolutely. My name is Rebecca Hamilton. I am a second generation family owner and co-CEO of the WS Badger Company. We manufacture organic personal care products and sunscreens out in rural New Hampshire. And I have the great pleasure of running the company with my sister and also my parents, who are still involved peripherally and day to day.
Mm. And so I'd love to start there as to what does it mean to you and maybe to the greater Badger family to be family owned and second generation. And what's that like? Like, what does that feel like for you?
Well, I get along really well with my family. So it is overwhelmingly an amazing positive experience. I'm sure that for a lot of people, it could be a really challenging experience as well. But what that means for me is that as a mission driven company, rather than just having one person making the decision and holding us to our mission and our values, there's four of us. And so I
Mm,
feel like with four of us working together, if one person kind of falters and is not sure whether or not we would hold firm on our mission, the other three can kind of bolster that. And I think what ends up happening is that we are an incredibly values driven business. And I think it comes from having a core leadership, which is a tight bonded family unit.
mm. I think that certainly shines through in doing a little bit of research and delving into the whole Badger history that I've been doing the last few days in preparation here. I'm interested in particular as to how the co-CEO role feels. Is that's just for any type of business, family owned or otherwise, it's something that's a little unordinary. But that with your sister Emily, I'd love to hear more about it.
Well, I think it's daunting for a lot of people because the traditional business model is this idea that you have one CEO who has the ultimate say in how you're directing the
Mm.
business. And our actual titles aren't co chief executive officers, they're collaborative executive officers. And it's a little bit tongue in cheek, but we chose those titles because we feel like they more accurately represent what we do in our business leadership.
Mm.
And we actually day to day run the business with a strategic leadership team. So that's my sister and I are on a team with the rest of the directors in the business who each hold a different part of the company. And so while we might have kind of a ultimate say in the long-term vision and direction of the business, we rely heavily on this larger team because we recognize that each of them bring expertise from their area of the company and that we can make better decisions as a team than we would be able to as individuals. And so we've been doing that for a number of years, long before we became co-CEOs. And so the transition to co-CEOs was very, very uh, simple in a lot of ways because we'd already been running the business as a collective, starting as a collective family, then with our strategic team, and now with my sister and I kind of taking the helm on visionary work, but also day to day running it with the strategic team.
Hmm. And so, from what I understand, you and your sister moved into that role in 2018, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so how has the 2 year transition been? What feels different now than the work of your role and maybe your sister's on the day to day before?
When we took over as co-CEOs, I think we thought nothing would change because we've been slowly transitioning toward this co-CEO leadership for many years.
Mm.
Our father had been stepping back out of the role. In fact, a full year before we took on that role, he stopped working at Badger to build a house for himself and for my mother. And so he wasn't coming into work at all. And about halfway through the year, we asked him, are you retired? Are you on sabbatical? We haven't seen you at work in a while. He's like, no, just sabbatical. I'll come back. And then after a year, he's like, I don't think this title CEO really fits the work that I'm doing. I think that it's time to officially transition. So all that to say that in some ways it was very smooth and seamless because we'd slowly been having this transition happen over many years and had been really relying on the expertise and guidance of our parents, but also taking on more and more of the leadership of the company day to day. That said, in the last 2 years, so much has happened.
Mm.
From, we took on the manufacturing of our sunscreen, which involved doubling the size of our manufacturing building, becoming an FDA drug facility, building a quality control laboratory, changing all of our systems and procedures. So that was one major thing that happened.
Mm.
Uh, and then we have a changing landscape in terms of Whole Foods being one of our core customers, being bought by Amazon, transitions in the marketplace, and then we had a pandemic. So uh, business as usual in the last 2 years is hard to it's hard to really understand what things would have been like if we hadn't had such major things going on. But that's also the life of running a business.
Mm.
So and something a more mission based level, we're in on Monday officially flipping the switch to transition all of our manufacturing to solar. So
Mm.
in the midst of the pandemic, we had started this project which we had collaborated with another B Corp on, and we're officially going to be a solar powered drug manufacturer. So
Mm.
a lot of different things going on, and it's hard to say which ones are connected to us being in the position of co-CEOs and which ones are just
Circumstantial.
as a business.
Right. Well, I'd love to dive into the solar project here in a moment, but I guess with all that, there's so much that you brought up, given the worldly context and the transition and the new manufacturing, and I'm curious, how do you feel you and your sister and maybe your leadership team, how are y'all keeping things sorted as to what to prioritize, to focus on, how are you working through that? And I know this moment that we're in right now might make that even more challenging, but I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that sort of focus and prioritization.
And that is the question that we deal with every day, and it changes. So we look at ourselves as being a mission-driven business first and foremost, but in order to fulfill our mission, we actually are a for-profit business that has to make money, or we can't
Mm.
afford to do any of the nice things that we do. And so putting mission first, but recognizing that money is the fuel that's going to get us to be able to fulfill the things that we want,
Mm-hmm.
means that we have to look at the business and say, structurally, what do we need to do to keep the engine running, to keep that flow of money so that we can afford the things that we want to do? And then how can we streamline our processes so that we can maximize the good that we're doing? Because, as a family business that is not beholden to any investors, we want to have the business be doing things that we feel good about. Like
Mm.
that's why my sister and I are part of this business, and it would be a lot less interesting to us if it was just kind of money for the sake of money. Not really it's not really what drives us. So it is a delicate balance. We do have to prioritize keeping the doors open, but not it's always the balance of trying to figure out how to not sacrifice those values that are the reason we're in business.
Mm. And I mean, I guess then into the solar project, which is something that has seemed to balance both of those needs, being something that has been a very savvy business decision from the sense of consumption and savings, to as well overlapping with what's important as far as it relates to y'all's mission. So I'd love to hear. This was actually what reminded me. I think I may have bothered you a few times, as I've loved to have you on the podcast for a while. But this is what reminded me to reach out once again, was this article from your friends at Revision Energy. So I'd love to hear more about this project, what went into the decision, and how it's been. I didn't know in reading the articles and the updates that the switch was getting flipped here soon. So that's good
Yeah,
timing.
yeah, it's excellent timing, and it's very exciting. I think that in this whole process of trying to prioritize things, there are these golden wins when you actually have something that is going to be a cost saving, that's going to improve quality, and is
Right.
going to do the right thing based on your mission. And the solar was just one of those where we were able to partner with Revision. They were able to find investors to put the money up front. So we were looking at actually saving money in
Mm,
this investment in our future, in being able, we have property, so we're able to do one of the largest ground and roof solar mounts in the region. And so we're able to provide all of the power needed for our manufacturing, and it looks like quite a bit extra that can then go to power the grid, our own grid. So, you know, having the opportunity to actually move forward on something, even though it's a really difficult time, this is kind of a ray of light. You know, we were able to provide kind of, I guess, through this project, provide jobs during the pandemic where people were
mm,
outside and able to socially distance, and ultimately transition to renewable energy, which fit in with what we're trying to accomplish as our company, is being a company that's really having more positive impact wherever we can in terms of climate change and the environment.
mm. And so what I was able to pick up is that you signed this agreement to endure on this project with Revision the day after y'all made the commitment um, at
Yes,
COP25. Can you share that story? Is that accurate? Is that
that is it. That literally happened. Yeah. Well, we had heard that a number of B Corps were going to the COP25 and were going to make a public statement about moving to net zero emissions by 2030,
mm,
which is an ambitious goal, of course, but B Corps are known for being ambitious. And Badger, you know, having this be a core mission-based principle, felt that it was something that we could and should be part of. And so we made the public statement that we were going to go to net zero by 2030, and we had started the process of looking at solar when we were thinking about making the statement, and we'd gone through a process of kind of mapping out what we would need to do to achieve that goal.
mm,
And the first step that was really close to happening was this idea of moving forward on solar. And so in some ways the timing just worked out that we were able to make that public announcement and we were ready to sign the documents for going solar the next day. And in some ways we were kind of pushing the two along at the same time, and we felt like that was the first step on our plan, and to be able to actually take action that soon after making a commitment felt really authentic to us. And since it was such a big ostentatious goal, we wanted to have a tangible first step that we were doing right away to show that we were actually, uh, we meant what we had committed to and that we were going to follow through on that.
mm. I mean that's quite. I think calling that a first step is not exactly accurate. I'm sorry to correct you. It seems like y'all have quite the list of initiatives that you've taken on
Oh,
previously in energy savings, waste reduction.
that's
Um,
fair. That's fair.
well,
First
and
step after making that commitment. First,
exact.
next step.
Sure, sure. I mean, you probably have to take some baby steps before enduring on something of that scope, which it seems like you'll have taken quite a few. So, I mean, and speaking of, I'd love to hear more about some of those and maybe what's forecasted in the near future. I mean, looking through my notes here, I've seen I think the Save Every Drop program. Y'all are doing some really innovative stuff in regenerative soil, and yeah, I'd love if you could share a little bit more of what y'all might have up your sleeve, as if that was the first milestone for you. What's next in this area of sustainability and stewardship?
When we were looking at going to net zero by 2030, we started with, of course, you have your scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. And so our scope 1 emissions, our factory, was our first place to start. And that's why, even though you can't really set goals without starting by measuring your baseline, so our first step was to measure our baseline, to understand what our impact was, to understand what kind of emissions we already have.
Mm,
But then the tangible step of addressing that was to go solar and to have all of our scope 1 emissions be renewable energy.
mm,
The regenerative project is a much, much larger and more complex project because we don't know how to accomplish that. And so our first step on that was to do a regenerative project on site at the Badger property. So we have about 16 acres that the Badger manufacturing facility is built on. My father designed and led the building of all of our manufacturing. So it's beautiful wooden post beam. And we have organic gardens that we've had for quite a few years. For a while, we were supplying our lunch program with the organic gardens. In the last couple of years, we've been doing a gleaning program where we supply the local food kitchen with fresh veggies from the garden. And then we have the grounds, which right now is partially solar panels, but there's grass and wildflowers in between there, and then the lawn in front of our property. And so we wanted to look at what would it take to have a mini regenerative project on site, because if we were going to start talking to our suppliers about that, we should have an understanding of what that meant to us. And so we started implementing regenerative practices on our own property. We worked with a local university to have students come in and measure our soil carbon and above and below ground biodiversity to kind of get a baseline. And then we worked on creating a bioreactor, which is basically like an intensive composting system with microbes that will be ready in a few months. And the idea is that you spread that over the ground, and that helps to retain water and build up soil carbon. So we've got a number of things that we're working on right now, and the hope is that in a year or so, when we measure our soil carbon again, that we'll have increased it, and then we can use that story as we start talking to our suppliers about whether or not they have commitments toward regenerative practices.
And so I'm interested in, as you know, as these are such I guess pretty demanding initiatives to take on. It seems like from maybe start to finish, in some ways, you kind of have to learn the ins and outs of whatever sort of project you're taking on and deciding to implement into the operations, and ultimately supply chain and working with your partners there. I know y'all have been a certified B Corporation since 2011, and this climate commitment to go net zero by 2030 was originally done by 500 plus B Corps. I think it's now 700 or so. So I'm trying to get to what is the significance of that community to you, to the kind of greater Badger family, and having all these other companies in the space taking the same pledge and commitment, and perhaps working on it as voraciously as y'all are at the same time.
Well, we work quite a bit with the larger B Corp community. When we first became a B Corp, we actually had learned about it, and we were in the process of moving from our original building, which was, a house and then a garage and then a warehouse, and they're all kind of and haunted. And then we built this beautiful new manufacturing facility, and we were growing really rapidly. And even though we were moving into what felt like home, there was a lot of concern that as we expanded, we would lose the core kind of family mission-based spirit that we had when we were a much smaller company. And so when we discovered the B Corp certification, we saw that as a tool that we could use to build our mission into the DNA of our business, that we could grow gracefully and not lose the things that made us Badger, the mission-based things, the sustainability, the community, the way that we treat our employees. And so we didn't really think about the B Corp community. We just thought about the impact assessment as being a good tool. We weren't even looking at the marketing potential or anything like that. Just pure and simple, let's use the impact assessment. And then we barely got a high enough score to become a B Corp. And we thought, well, we got just over 80. Let's become a certified B Corp. Why not? But when you become a B Corp, you also sign a declaration of interdependence. And the goal of it, which I think is really cool, is that it's not just a certification that sets businesses apart. It's a certification that brings businesses together with a common goal of creating a new sector of the economy where business is a force for good. And that's really compelling to me, because if you asked my younger self if I was ever going to get into business, I would have told you it was a dirty word and I was going to go do some kind of activist thing that had nothing to do with business. And the B Corp community gives a mechanism for mission-driven businesses to work together toward greater good, toward a greater purpose. And so the first time I went to a retreat with other B Corps, I actually began seeing the value, which is that this is a community of mission-driven businesses that have a similar goal of wanting to have a positive impact, and the willingness of sharing best practices, of working on projects together, of bringing the whole community up is just unheard of in the business community. And so I think that's really the value that you get from becoming a B Corp, is that you actually get this beautiful community of businesses that are willing to work together and help everyone to be better.
Mm. And so as it relates to y'all's environmental initiatives, is there a lot of collaboration going on between some of your B Corp colleagues?
We actually just a few years ago started this really lovely summit, which is a climate change summit,
Mm.
which is CEOs in the B Corp community. And it's a working summit, which is really cool in that you actually go there for 3 days. And when you leave, you've all made agreements on specific action-based and monetary goals that you're all going to work on together to help further your environmental mission.
Mm.
And so I have found that that community has been incredibly helpful and has helped us to have a better understanding of what we need to do as a business that wants to have a positive environmental impact.
Mm. And so I guess I'm curious to hear maybe more about the goals, or maybe where, in your opinion, not just for Badger, but maybe holistically for the business community, like where do you feel is the gap? And obviously, net zero 2030 is a goal and we aren't there yet. But I'm curious, there are so many wonderful things happening within this community as an example, but where do you feel is the gap between us, confidently being able to achieve markers like that in the business community and where we are now?
There is a very big gap. I think that aspirationally, we envision a future. We're a very aspirational business. I mean, we have our storytelling and the Badgers in magical lands, and we believe in a utopian future. It comes a lot from my father being a storyteller and being a believer in this possible bright utopian future. And so I think that in the utopian future, we would create products that would generate good. So you would have, for every product that you purchase, more good would happen than bad.
Mm.
And I don't think we're there yet. I think we're a long ways off from that. We have products that are packaged in plastic that comes from a dirty petroleum industry. Even if it's post-consumer recycled, it still is. We have products that are in metal that comes from also a mining industry that can be damaging to the earth. And even if we try and use recycled metal, at some point it was coming from the earth and was probably damaging.
Mm.
We have ingredients that, even though they're organic or regenerative and have short supply chains, they're still shipped here using fuel. And so when we look at the idea of having a consumer product that generates good, we're a long ways off from that. But I think it's possible, and that might be my utopian mind. But I think it is possible, and I think you can start to quantify each of your products and look at what are the ways that you're having a negative impact, what are the ways that you're having a positive impact, and how do you shift so that people are actually creating a positive impact in the world by their purchases.
Mm.
And so that's what we're working toward. That's the ultimate goal. Going to net zero emissions by 2030 is just one piece of it.
Hmm. And so I guess to that flip side, from the gap to maybe where you're hopeful, I'm wondering what do you feel like you understand now about maybe the behaviors of businesses and business leaders in this realm of achieving a much more environmentally sustainable way of doing business, ideally regenerative way of doing business, what do you feel like you've learned maybe most recently, or an understanding that you've come to about this movement and this area of change that you hadn't previously?
Well, I think the people in this movement are really creative
Mm,
and they're willing to throw out the status quo for something different. And I think that if we actually are going to achieve that goal of generating good with each product that people purchase, something has to change and it has to be pretty drastic. And I don't know what it is yet. And so
mm,
that's really where I think the true digging comes in. We can all pat ourselves on the back about going solar and using sustainable packaging and having good organic ingredients, but nobody is doing it perfectly. Probably nobody will ever, but we have a long, long way to go. And so there's a huge room for improvement for everyone in our community. But I think that they're willing to do the work and they're willing to try things that are maybe a little bit edgy or maybe haven't been done before. And that's really exciting because I think that's what's needed.
mm. I certainly agree. Well, Rebecca, before we finish up, could I hit you with a few rapid fire questions?
Oh, I'm ready.
Okay, so the first one, and I ask everyone this one, how long have you been DJing?
I did not expect that one since 2013.
Well, I attended the B Corporation Champions Retreat in LA, and I went to the like Wanderlust party,
Oh, yeah.
and I was walking through the room that you were performing in, and I looked up, and I was like, oh, maybe that's a local artist, and it was like, oh, thanks to Rebecca Hamilton from Badger, like, I'm like, oh, I know that company. Very talented. You have quite a few skills, it would seem.
I started DJing because I actually have an arts organization, and when we first started putting on events in rural New Hampshire, we didn't have DJs, and so I had a certain kind of music that I knew I wanted to play. We were bringing in installation art, and so I had to become a DJ in order to get the music I wanted for the events that I was putting on.
Well, there you go. You were called to it. You didn't choose it. It was a calling, it seems.
So it was just a means to an end.
Sure, sure. Okay, maybe more of a traditional question. I'm curious, has there been a book that's impacted you recently, or maybe something you always come back to that you'd love to recommend?
Oh, yeah. Well, from a long time ago, when I was first in business school, one of our books that we read was the Patagonia Let My People Go Surfing.
Mm,
And that was
good one.
kind of a very early introduction to mission driven businesses. And um, I haven't read it in years, but I just love the message there. And I think that was a lovely, lovely introduction to what we have in our business community.
Mm, I'm with you. Next one, do you have any particular morning routines or daily habits that you absolutely have to stick to?
I do. So at Badger, we have a gym and it has 25-foot ceilings. And so when we built the warehouse, I had them install big bolts so that I could hang aerial silks. So
Mm,
I do aerial silks every day at Badger before lunch at
very
11.
cool. Pretty routine. Pretty routine.
Yeah.
Let's see. Outside of maybe the DJing and the silks, are there any other particular hobbies or enthusiasms that you're pursuing outside of your work?
Probably too many.
Yeah.
I don't like to be bored. Let's see. I think this past year I started ice climbing over the winter and doing a little bit of rock climbing, which eventually led to doing climbing Mount Baker this last week.
Very
So
cool.
I've been enjoying kind of the multiple outdoor activities that fit with climbing mountains. I also enjoy a little bit of sailing and surfing this summer, and I like collecting wild edibles.
Okay.
I do have a restaurant bar, so I like working on fancy uh, cocktails.
Wow, man, quite the eclectic skill set and
Kind of a random assortment, yes.
yeah, very cool. Okay, very final question. What piece of advice might you give to the aspiring or as well active purpose-driven business leader?
You don't have to do everything, and every business is different. So if you look at other businesses and think that you should be doing whatever they're doing, that can be really discouraging. But if you have the right intention and you look at every choice and you say, how can I make a choice that I feel is kind and thoughtful and doing the right thing, then you're going to end up with an incredible mission driven business.
Mm. Finally, any last places to plug or direct folks for anything unique or special with Badger at the moment?
Well, I'm most excited right now about this idea of sunscreen powered by the sun, since we're about to flip the switch and go solar in a week. And we are largely a sunscreen manufacturer. And this year we have a new product, which is a sunscreen in a tin, only has 4 ingredients,
Mm.
which are certified organic sunflower oil, organic beeswax, vitamin E, and zinc oxide. So it's this incredibly simple product, and I feel like it's the closest we've come toward this idea of a product that generates good. We're on that path. We're still a long ways, but I'm pretty excited about that product.
Mm. Wonderful. Well, we'll make sure folks can find the sunscreen powered by the sun at our show notes at growensemble.com. Thank you so much, Rebecca.
Thank you, Corey.